For 3 years, Abigail Mercer was the nurse. Nobody noticed a ghost drifting through the chaotic halls of Seattle Memorial. But on a rainy Tuesday, that silence shattered. A military-grade black helicopter bypassed the helipad, touching down in the staff lot. Heavily armed federal agents poured out. Their target, her. To survive in the Level 1 trauma center at Seattle Memorial Hospital, you either needed an ego loud enough to drown out the chaos or a presence quiet enough to slip right through it. Abigail Mercer chose the latter. In fact, she had perfected it. She was 34 years old, with ash-brown hair perpetually tied back in a messy utilitarian bun. She wore standard-issue navy blue scrubs that were always a size too large, hiding her frame, and scuffed gray Asics running shoes that made absolutely no sound against the linoleum floors. If you asked the hospital staff to describe her, most would struggle. Dr. Harrison Miller, the arrogant but brilliant attending ER physician, had worked alongside her for 2 years and still occasionally called her Amanda. Patricia Higgins, the veteran charge nurse who ruled the floor with an iron clipboard, only knew Abigail as the reliable body she could slot into the agonizing 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. weekend night float without a single complaint. Abigail was a phantom. She didn't gossip in the break room. She never attended the post-shift drinks at the gloomy dive bar across the street. Her locker contained no photographs of smiling nieces or nephews, no magnetic mirrors, no inspirational quotes. It held exactly 3 items: a spare pair of scrubs, a sleek, heavy black flashlight that looked more like a blunt force weapon, and a battered leather-bound notebook she never opened in public. No one noticed that Abigail never seemed to sweat, even when the ER was overflowing with a 6-car pileup from the I-5 interstate. No one noticed that her hands never shook when she pushed IV lines into the collapsed veins of combative patients. They just knew she was competent, quiet, and easily ignored. The first subtle crack in Abigail's carefully constructed civilian facade occurred on a frigid Thursday in late November, though nobody in the hospital possessed the training to recognize it. Paramedics wheeled in a John Doe just past midnight. The man was in his early 40s, convulsing violently against the gurney straps. His skin was slick with a profuse, unnatural sweat, and his pupils were pinned to the size of needle points. "What do we have?" Dr. Miller barked, snapping on his gloves as the gurney crashed into Trauma Bay 2. "Found him in an alley off Pike Street," the lead paramedic shouted over the monitor's frantic beeping. "Massive respiratory distress, heart rate dropping. Suspected synthetic fentanyl overdose. We hit him with 2 doses of Narcan in the rig, but he's totally unresponsive to it. He's crashing, Doc." "All right, give me another 4 milligrams of naloxone. Push it now. Get him ready to intubate," Miller ordered, stepping back as the nurses swarmed. Samantha Jenkins, a young nurse, fresh out of nursing school, scrambled to draw the medication. The patient suddenly vomited a frothy, pink-tinged liquid, his chest heaving as his airway constricted. The monitor alarm shrieked, signaling profound bradycardia. His heart was grinding to a halt. Abigail stood at the foot of the bed. Her eyes were locked not on the monitor, but on the patient's rapidly twitching facial muscles and the excessive tear production streaming down his temples. She leaned in, her nose twitching slightly as she caught a faint, almost imperceptible scent wafting off the man's soaked clothing, a smell like rotting fruit and wet copper. "Narcan isn't going to work, Dr. Miller," Abigail said. Her voice was quiet, but it possessed a strange vibrating frequency that cut straight through the panicked noise of the room. Dr. Miller glared at her, exasperated. "Abigail, I didn't ask for a consult. The man is overdosing on street junk. Push the damn Narcan." Look at his muscle fasciculations. Look at the lacrimation and the bronchial secretions. Abigail stepped around the bed, physically blocking Samantha from administering the opiate reversal drug. "He's in a cholinergic crisis. This isn't fentanyl. It's an organophosphate poisoning, a nerve agent. Someone hit him with a synthetic sarin derivative." The room froze for a fraction of a second. Dr. Miller stared at her as if she had just spoken in ancient Greek. "A nerve agent in downtown Seattle. Are you out of your mind? He's a junkie. If you intubate him without reversing the muscarinic effects, his lungs will drown in their own fluids in less than 60 seconds. Abigail's tone left no room for debate. It was a command delivered with the chilling authority of someone who had seen this exact death a dozen times before. Without waiting for Miller's authorization, Abigail reached into the crash cart. She snapped the caps off 2 massive pre-filled syringes of atropine and pralidoxim. Before Miller could yell for hospital security, Abigail drove the needles directly into the patient's outer thigh, pushing the high-dose anticholinergics into his system. "What the hell are you doing?" Miller screamed, his face flushing dark red. "I'll have your license for that." Abigail didn't flinch. She kept her fingers pressed against the man's carotid artery, her eyes fixed on the wall clock. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. At 30 seconds, the violent convulsions abruptly ceased. The man took a massive shuddering gasp of air. The shrill alarm of the heart monitor shifted from a chaotic, failing rhythm into a steady, stabilizing beep. Beep, beep. His airway was opening. The foaming stopped. Dr. Miller stood paralyzed, his mouth slightly open. Samantha dropped the unused Narcan syringe on the tray wide-eyed. Abigail pulled the empty syringes from the man's leg, tossed them into the biohazards bin, and smoothly wiped her hands. The authoritative, commanding presence vanished instantly, folding back in on itself like a magic trick. She lowered her shoulders, broke eye contact, and retreated to the periphery of the room. "He's stable, Dr. Miller," Abigail murmured, her voice meek and soft once again. "Good call on the atypical toxicity protocol." Miller swallowed hard, looking from the stabilized patient to the quiet nurse, his ego hastily rewriting the narrative to protect itself. "Right, yes. Good. Good catch, team. Let's get his blood sent to the lab for a tox screen." No one reported the incident. Miller certainly wasn't going to admit a mid-level nurse had overridden him and saved a life. But that night when Abigail retreated to the locker room, she didn't just change her shoes. She pulled out the burner phone, hidden inside her heavy flashlight, popped in an encrypted SIM card, and sent a single coded text message to a dark web routing server. "Phosphorus in Sector 4. They are testing the product." She snapped the SIM card in half, flushed it down the toilet, and walked out into the Seattle rain, becoming invisible once again. 3 days later. Tuesday, 2:14 p.m. The ER was running at maximum capacity. A relentless Pacific Northwest downpour hammered against the reinforced glass windows of the hospital lobby. Inside, it was a symphony of misery. Coughing toddlers moaning trauma victims, the sharp smell of bleach, and the low buzzing hum of fluorescent lights. Abigail was at the nursing station quietly charting vitals for a patient with a fractured tibia. Patricia Higgins was loudly berating an intern about a missing signature, and Dr. Miller was aggressively sipping an espresso, complaining about hospital administration. Then the floor began to vibrate. It started as a low, percussive thrumming in the chest, a rhythmic pounding that rattled the metal clipboards on the desk and made the coffee ripple in Dr. Miller's cup. "What on earth is that?" Patricia frowned, looking up at the ceiling. "Is Life Flight coming in? I didn't get an alert from dispatch." "That's not a Bell 407, Miller said, frowning as the noise grew deafening. "That sounds huge." The roar of twin turboshaft engines overpowered every sound in the hospital. Outside the main entrance windows, the gray afternoon sky was abruptly blocked out. Through the rain-streaked glass, the hospital staff watched in stunned disbelief as a massive matte black Sikorsky MH-60M Black Hawk descended from the storm clouds. It had no civilian markings, no medical Red Crosses, no FAA tail numbers. Just dark radar-absorbent paint and an aggressive predatory silhouette. It bypassed the hospital's reinforced rooftop helipad completely. Instead, the pilot executed a reckless combat-style flare maneuver, dropping the 10-ton aircraft directly into the physician's parking lot. The downwash from the massive rotors ripped small trees from their roots, sent trash cans flying through the air, and violently shattered the windshield of a parked Lexus. Before the landing gear even fully compressed against the asphalt, the side doors slid open. "Oh my God!" Samantha gasped, pressing her hands against the glass. 4 men poured out of the helicopter into the driving rain. They weren't paramedics. They were clad in Black Cry precision tactical gear plate carriers and advanced communications headsets. They carried short-barreled suppressed MK-18 rifles resting tightly against their chests. Moving with terrifying synchronized precision, they formed a diamond perimeter around a 5th man, an older gentleman wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit and a slate-gray trench coat, holding an encrypted satellite tablet. "Hospital security, get security down here right now," Patricia shrieked, diving for the emergency phone. The automatic sliding doors of the ER blew open the wind and rain rushing into the sterile lobby. The tactical team breached the entrance water, dripping from their rifles and tactical helmets. Hospital security guards, 2 overweight men with pepper spray, rushed forward, but froze instantly as the point man simply raised a hand, his cold eyes visible behind ballistic glasses. The man in the trench coat stepped forward. His gaze swept the terrified, silent emergency room. "Who is in charge of this floor?" the man asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried absolute, uncompromising authority. Dr. Miller, attempting to salvage some scrap of his ego, puffed out his chest and stepped forward. "I am Dr. Harrison Miller, chief attending. You cannot just storm into a civilian hospital with firearms. I'm calling the police." The suited man didn't even look at Miller. He reached into his coat and produced a solid black credentials wallet, flipping it open to reveal a gold shield and a Department of Defense identification card. It read, Director Hayes Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, Directorate of Operations. The Seattle Police Department has already cordoned off a 3-mile radius around this facility, Dr. Director Hayes said coldly. As of 2 minutes ago, this hospital is under federal lockdown under the authority of the National Command Authority. I am looking for one of your staff. Patricia, her hand still trembling on the phone receiver, swallowed hard. Who? Hayes looked down at his tablet. I need eyes on Abigail Mercer. The name hung in the air. For a moment, the staff was genuinely confused. Abigail. The quiet temp nurse who worked the terrible shifts, the woman whose last name half of them didn't even know. Abigail, Dr. Miller scoffed nervously. You brought a military assault team for Abigail. She's just a scrub nurse. She's charting vitals by the—" Miller turned around, pointing toward the nursing station. Abigail was no longer sitting at the computer. She was standing at the edge of the hallway leading to the trauma bays. But the woman standing there no longer looked like the mousy, invisible nurse they had known for years. Her posture was entirely different. Her shoulders were squared, her spine perfectly straight, her chin raised in a posture of arrogant, lethal readiness. Her hands rested casually at her sides, unbothered by the heavy weaponry pointed in her general direction. The tactical operators immediately shifted their formation, creating a clear path between her and Director Hayes. "I told you 3 years ago," Hayes' Abigail's voice rang out. Gone was the soft, deferential tone she used with the doctors. Her voice was sharp, crystalline, and laced with absolute venom. "I am retired. I burned my clearance. I walked away." Director Hayes sighed, the heavy weight of the world seemingly resting on his shoulders. He took a step toward her, ignoring the dozens of stunned medical professionals watching them. "You know we wouldn't break protocol unless it was a level 1 extinction contingency cipher." Hayes used a code name that sent a chill down Dr. Miller's spine. "We didn't come to force you back into active duty. We came because we have no one else who understands the biometrics of what we're facing." Abigail crossed her arms over her baggy scrubs. "I warned your analysts that the Chimera strain wasn't stable. I told them not to move it from the black site in Belarus. They didn't move it," Hayes replied, his voice dropping to a grim whisper that still carried in the dead silent room. "It got out. We have a confirmed outbreak at an underground DARPA facility in Nevada. Total containment failure. The on-site medical staff melted from the inside out in under 4 hours. The Tier 1 cleanup team we sent in, they went dark 20 minutes ago." Abigail closed her eyes, a muscle feathering in her jaw. The ghosts of a past life she had desperately tried to bury were dragging her back down into the dark. She opened her eyes, and the quiet nurse from Seattle Memorial Hospital died in that exact moment. How long until the fail-safe protocols vent the facility into the civilian atmosphere? She demanded, her mind instantly shifting into tactical logistics. 3 hours, Hayes said. "The chopper is fueled for a direct intercept. We have a mobile biohazard armory waiting for you on board. Tell me what you need." "I need total operational control. No oversight from the Pentagon suits. If I say we burn a sector, we burn it. Understand? You have carte blanche." Hayes confirmed. Abigail nodded once. Right in front of the stunned ER staff, she reached under the collar of her oversized blue scrubs and ripped them downward, popping the cheap fabric seams. Underneath, she wasn't wearing standard hospital undershirts. She was wearing a skin-tight black cut-resistant tactical shirt. She walked past Dr. Miller without so much as a glance. She stopped next to Patricia, gently placing her hospital badge on the charge nurse's clipboard. "I won't be in for my shift tomorrow, Patricia," Abigail said softly. "It was a pleasure working with you." Before anyone could speak, Abigail Mercer walked out the shattered sliding doors, stepping into the violent downwash of the Black Hawk, leaving her colleagues staring at the ghost who had just become their only hope for survival. The interior of the MH-60M Black Hawk was an aggressive symphony of roaring turbines and flashing red tactical lights. The moment the heavy side doors slammed shut, sealing out the Seattle rain, the civilian world Abigail Mercer had inhabited for 3 agonizingly quiet years officially ceased to exist. She did not sit in the canvas jump seats. Instead, she moved directly to the steel-reinforced lockbox bolted to the bulkhead. Director Hayes had already punched in the biometric override. Inside the matte black armory case was a custom-fitted Level 4 chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear defense suit, the MOPP-4 variant, colored in a deep, non-reflective obsidian. Next to it lay a sleek Heckler & Koch MP7 submachine gun, equipped with a customized Osprey suppressor and a thermal optic. Abigail stripped off the remainder of her hospital scrubs without a shred of hesitation, stepping into the armored hazardous environment suit. Her hands, which only an hour ago had been gently adjusting, IV drip rates now moved with terrifying mechanical precision as she locked the ceramic ballistic plates into her chest carrier. Director Hayes watched her from across the narrow cabin, his face illuminated by the harsh glow of his encrypted satellite terminal. The Pentagon analysts are panicking, Cypher. The Chimera strain was supposed to be a dead-end project, a theoretical viral agent splicing the rapid transmission rate of airborne measles with the hemorrhagic devastation of the Marburg virus. The fail-safes at the Tonopah Subterranean Research Facility were designed to withstand a direct nuclear strike. Yet, 20 minutes ago, the internal sensors detected a massive atmospheric breach in Sector 7. Abigail snapped a loaded magazine into her weapon and racked the charging handle. A virus doesn't bypass a triple redundant biometric airlock, Hayes. Someone opened the door from the inside. That is exactly what we fear. Hayes admitted, his voice barely audible over the rotor blades as the helicopter broke the sound barrier, rocketing south toward the Nevada desert. We sent in a Tier 1 cleanup crew Alpha Squad, the best operators JSOC has to offer. They breached the upper levels, reported heavy biological contamination, and then their telemetry feeds went completely dark. We assumed their suits degraded or the virus evolved to eat through the synthetic rubber. No, Abigail said coldly, securing her gas mask to her hip. If Chimera mutated to consume polymers, the structural seals of the entire underground bunker would have dissolved, and the western seaboard would already be bleeding out of its eyes. Alpha Squad didn't melt. They were neutralized. A rugged, heavily scarred JSOC operator sitting near the cockpit leaned forward. His name tape read, Mitchell. With all due respect, ma'am, Alpha Squad doesn't just get neutralized. They are ghost operators. Unless the virus learned how to operate an assault rifle, your theory doesn't hold water. Abigail locked her icy gaze onto Commander Mitchell. You are thinking like a soldier, Commander. I am thinking like a pathologist. A pathogen wants to spread, but it cannot deliberately target radio communications. Someone is down there. Someone who wants the world to think this is a containment failure. 3 hours later, the helicopter descended into the desolate, unforgiving landscape of the Tonopah test range. The desert was cloaked in the pitch-black darkness of a moonless night, the only illumination coming from the harsh, sweeping floodlights of the military quarantine perimeter. A colossal concrete bunker jutted out of the sand like a brutalist tombstone. This was Facility 4. Abigail and Mitchell's 4-man insertion team fast roped onto the concrete staging pad. The heavy steel blast doors of the main entrance were already forced open, the hydraulic hinges screaming as the desert wind howled through the gap. Abigail secured her CBRN respirator over her face, the airtight seal hissing as the pressurized oxygen flow engaged. The heads-up display inside her visor flared to life, feeding her ambient temperature, radiation levels, and biological particulate counts. Weapons free, suppressed fire only. We do not know what kind of explosive gases might be leaking from the compromised labs. Abigail commanded taking the point position. They descended into the subterranean elevator shaft, rappelling down 300 feet into the suffocating darkness. The air grew immediately stagnant, heavy with the metallic copper-like scent of dried blood that the chemical filters struggled to scrub out. When they hit sub-level 3, Mitchell's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the horror. The corridor was littered with bodies wearing pristine white hazmat suits. The DARPA scientists. Abigail knelt beside the closest corpse, shining her weapon-mounted light over the victim's faceplate. "Is it Chimera?" Mitchell asked, keeping his rifle trained down the long, blinking hallway. Abigail wiped a thick smear of crimson off the scientist's shattered visor. She examined the entry wound with the cold, clinical detachment of a trauma nurse, but the tactical mind of a JSOC legend. No petechial hemorrhaging, no liquefaction of the ocular cavities. His skin isn't blistered. Abigail said, her voice transmitting cleanly through the squad's encrypted comms. She reached down and extracted a small, crushed piece of copper from the concrete floor. He wasn't killed by a virus. He was killed by a 5.56 millimeter armor-piercing round. I was right, Hayes. She stood up, her MP7 raised her eyes, scanning the shadows. This isn't a biological disaster. This is a heist. Director Hayes, do you copy? Abigail spoke into her headset as she navigated the blood-slicked corridors of Sub-Level 5. I read you cipher. Hayes' voice crackled heavily, distorted by the hundreds of feet of reinforced concrete above them. The biological breach was a smokescreen. Abigail reported her team stacking up against the heavy titanium doors of the central virology lab. Someone slaughtered the scientists to bypass the biometric security, then deliberately triggered the atmospheric alarms to force a quarantine protocol. They wanted you to lock the facility down so they could secure the Chimera strain. Who has the tactical capability to wipe out Alpha Squad and hijack a DARPA black site? Mitchell whispered fiercely, checking his ammunition. A rogue element of our own intelligence apparatus, Abigail replied softly. A ghost from her past flickered in her mind. There was only one private military contractor with the clearance codes to bypass Tonopah's outer defenses, led by a man she had deeply despised during her active duty days, Elias Wyatt. Wyatt was a disgraced former bioweapons specialist who was dishonorably discharged for running illegal human trials in Eastern Europe. He wanted to sell the lethal virus now, breaching the main lab in 3, Mitchell signaled. He planted a localized breaching charge against the titanium hinges. Wait! Abigail commanded, her medical training suddenly converging with her tactical instincts. She looked up at the massive industrial HVAC ventilation shafts running along the ceiling. If Wyatt's mercenaries are inside the secure server room, retrieving the vials, they are locked in a hermetically sealed environment. If we blow the door, we risk a firefight in a room containing the most lethal pathogen on Earth. A single stray bullet shatters a vial, and we all die hazmat suits or knots, forever gone. Then how do we dig them out? Mitchell asked. Abigail moved to the localized atmospheric control panel on the wall. The screen was locked, flashing a red warning that the ambient pressure was being artificially maintained. She didn't bother trying to hack it. She unslung her rifle, drew her heavy tactical knife, and pried the metal casing off the wall, exposing the complex wiring of the primary oxygen scrubbers quickly. The human brain requires a constant, uninterrupted flow of oxygen. Abigail explained, her fingers deftly splicing a green data wire to a yellow power conduit to establish a new circuit. At 21% oxygen, you are fully functional. If I reverse the atmospheric scrubbers to pump pure nitrogen into the sealed lab, the oxygen level will plummet to 8% in less than 40 seconds. Hypoxia, Mitchell realized, staring at her in absolute awe. Exactly, Abigail said. They won't even realize they are suffocating. They won't gasp or choke. They will simply feel a mild euphoria, lose their motor functions, and pass out. It is the most peaceful weapon in the entire world. She shoved the spliced wires together. A shower of blue sparks erupted from the exposed control panel. The sparks were followed by the deep mechanical groan of the massive industrial fans, reversing their intake flow. Abigail stared at her digital watch, counting down the seconds with the exact same intense focus she used when administering life-saving drugs back in Seattle. 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 60 seconds. "Stack up, masks sealed tight," Abigail ordered. Mitchell bypassed the electronic lock manually, and the heavy titanium doors hissed open. The central virology lab was an enormous glass-walled cavern bathed in emergency red lighting. Abigail's tactile